everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're excited to be presenting some information on funding your citizen-based monitoring work. My name is Eva Lewandowski. I am the Citizen-Based Monitoring Coordinator here at the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, and I also coordinate the Wisconsin Citizen-Based Monitoring Network.
Hi everyone, I'm Kate Williamson. I'm the Director of Conservation Programs with the Natural Resources Foundation of Wisconsin.
Well, we have some exciting content that we're going to share with you today. We're going to be talking about how you can fund your citizen-based monitoring work through donations, creative fundraising opportunities, grants, contracts, and more. First, we're just going to give a little bit of background about our organizations and some terminology, and then we're going to jump in to the information that we have. So the Wisconsin Citizen-Based Monitoring Network is a large stakeholder collaboration of 190 different monitoring groups and projects. Our mission is to improve the effectiveness of volunteer monitoring efforts throughout the state, and we do that by providing resources to project leaders, volunteers, researchers, land managers, and everyone that's involved in citizen-based monitoring. Some of those resources include things like conferences. We had a great conference in March of 2018. Many of you might have attended. We offer trainings such as this webinar, as well as trainings specifically for getting involved with individual projects, funding, equipment lending libraries, newsletters, a lot of communications, social media. We're on both Facebook and Twitter. And we have a great event calendar on our website, which will help you post and promote your own event or find an event in your area for citizen science. And we also offer technical support. So if you have questions about some of the methods that you might want to use in your project, or questions about things like finding funding or how to best communicate with your volunteers, we can offer advice on those issues. And I'll pass it over to Kate to talk about NRF.
Sure. So the Natural Resources Foundation of Wisconsin, for those who aren't familiar, our mission is to provide sustainable funding for Wisconsin's most imperiled species and public lands while connecting generations to the wonders of Wisconsin's lands, waters, and wildlife through conservation, education, engagement, and giving. So we're a nonprofit that works across the entire state of Wisconsin, both at a statewide level, supporting some of the Department of Natural Resources work, but also at a really local level, funding hundreds of different conservation and environmental education organizations each year. We have invested over $7 million in conservation work. That's everything from restoration projects to wildlife recovery efforts to environmental education, and really connecting people to Wisconsin's natural resources in all sorts of different ways, from funding schools and nature centers to supporting citizen-based monitoring work that we're going to talk a little bit more about today. And I'll have a slide on more of our grant programs, but we are, as I mentioned, a hub for conservation funding, so make sure you check out our website, wisconservation.org/grants, to start looking around at our different grant offerings.
Great. So I just want to touch a little bit on terminology before we get started talking about funding. You'll probably hear Kate and I going back and forth between saying citizen science and citizen-based monitoring, and your group might use a different term like community science or volunteer monitoring. And really they all mean pretty similar things. Citizen science is any form of public engagement or volunteer involvement in scientific research. It could be astronomy, it could be human health, it could be the environment. And citizen-based monitoring, which we talk about a lot in Wisconsin, is public involvement in the long-term monitoring of our natural resources. So our plants, our animals, our waters, and habitats. And again, we do tend to use those terms interchangeably, and whatever term is right for your organization is fine as well. So let's go forward and start talking about some of the ways that you can fund your citizen-based monitoring work. There are a lot of different funding options. One of the most straightforward is just donations, asking people for financial support. So this is something that could involve a direct request to donors. Perhaps you have a list of volunteers, a list of members for your organization, a list of people who have donated before or of interested community members, and you can reach out to them via letter, via email, or even in person asking for a financial donation. It's really important that you leverage the connections that you have. So make sure you ask your volunteers or your staff if they have any connection to possible donors. They might know companies, organizations who regularly make donations, or they might know people who are looking to donate to a cause. Other forms of donations could include silent auctions and raffles. One thing to think about in terms of raffles is that if you get something donated and you want to try to raffle it off, you do need a license. So anything you do, you of course want to do legally, and to hold a legal raffle in Wisconsin, you need to have a raffle license. Silent auctions are similar to raffles, only people are paying for what they are actually receiving. So you could have people donate items to your silent auction. The picture on the screen is the silent auction that we held at the most recent Citizen-Based Monitoring Conference, and we were actually able to get over 50 donations and raise several $1,000s from our silent auction at that event. So it's a definite way that you can raise money for your project. And silent auctions and raffles can be both in person or online. Another option is crowdfunding. So crowdfunding is something that not everyone thinks of when they're trying to think of ways to raise money for their citizen-based monitoring project, but it's one that has been effective for some other projects. Crowdfunding is asking for money, but it's asking for money from people who don't necessarily have a connection with your project. So crowdfunding receives funding from a large number of donors who don't have a clear direct connection to your project. So these are people who might go to a crowdfunding platform and just read your profile and feel interested or excited by your project. And it could be folks from across the country or across the world who are interested and want to help. We have more in-depth information on our website, on the Citizen-Based Monitoring Network website. You can follow the link on the screen on crowdfunding in terms of a number of platforms that are available. Some of them, like Kickstarter or GoFundMe, you might have heard of in other capacities. There are also some science-specific crowdfunding sites that might be more applicable for your citizen science project, like Rocket Hub or Experiment.com. The example on the screen here is a citizen science project, not from Wisconsin, but from another part of the U.S. that successfully funded themselves on Experiment.com. They raised $4,500, which can really go a big way for a lot of citizen science projects. So be sure to look into crowdfunding on the website if that's something that you think might work for your project. There are some other creative donation ideas that you can use for your project as well. One of the most popular ones is Amazon Smile. You might have heard of this. With Amazon Smile, it's a part of Amazon.com. So anytime someone orders anything on Amazon, which is of course often, they can choose to send a part of their purchase price to a charity of their choice, and it's about 0.5% of their purchase price. And in order to have them direct that donation towards your organization, you need to be registered on the site. It's easy and quick to do. And one of the partners in the CBM network, HerpMapper, uses this regularly. They promote on Facebook and Twitter that if you're purchasing anything through Amazon, they should purchase through smile.amazon.com, and part of your purchase price will go to promote or support their citizen-based monitoring project. So this is something that other projects in Wisconsin are already doing. Another option is a donation process through a company called TerraCycle. TerraCycle recycles difficult to recycle items like toothpaste tubes or granola bar wrappers or makeup containers. And if you become a recycling spot for these items, you can send those in and exchange them for small cash donations. You're not going to get a lot of money through either of these options, but sometimes a little bit is enough to support the purchase of that piece of monitoring equipment or a little bit of contract work that you might need for graphic design or consulting. The final creative option that we have on the screen here are local store fundraisers. So oftentimes local restaurants, bars, grocery stores will host special fundraising days where part of every purchase is donated to a certain charity, and you can work with them to become that charity. Oftentimes there's applications that you can fill out, or you can approach the store manager or owner directly. And it's a great way not only to fundraise, but to raise awareness about your project or your organization.
And another fun, creative donation option is the Great Wisconsin Bertathon, which I'm hopeful anyone who's listening is familiar with the Bertathon. It's one of Wisconsin's largest fundraising campaigns for bird conservation right here in our state. It's a program run through my organization, the Natural Resources Foundation. And similar to a walkathon or a marathon where you obviously walk or run and ask your friends and family members to donate to a cause, in this event, people go out and have 24 hours with their team to see as many bird species as possible while raising funds through their friends and family members and networks. It's a really fun event. It engages thousands of people, both who bird and who donate. And what's great about this is it's an opportunity to combine citizen science with citizen science funding. By participating in the Bertathon, your organization, if you're doing conservation work, which of course citizen science, citizen-based monitoring work includes, you can raise money for your own organization's projects. So if you go out and participate in the Bertathon, half of the funds that you raise will go back to your organization directly for that work. It's really fun. It happens annually from April 15th through June 15th, and you can learn more at wibertathon.org. Just some of the organizations who recently have brought home funds: Baraboo Range Preservation Association, bird clubs, Audubon societies, nature centers, the list goes on and on. So definitely consider doing that. And what's great is you're also benefiting Wisconsin's birds, and you can e-bird while you're at it.
Great. Definitely encourage people to go out and participate in the Great Wisconsin Bertathon. Very fun. Another funding option is funding contracts. Now this is a little bit less common, but it's something that in Wisconsin some of you have certainly participated in. So larger citizen-based monitoring organizations like government agencies or universities or large nonprofits sometimes need to contract out part of their citizen science work, perhaps to coordinate trainings at a local level or coordinate volunteers at a local level. And if you're one of those local organizations, you can get a contract to coordinate at that local level. Many of you might be familiar with the DNR's partnership program, which ran from 2004 and actually contracted out with 261 projects to fund citizen-based monitoring work at the local level. So that's always something to keep your eye out for. Another funding option is product donations. So sometimes you don't need the actual cash in hand. Sometimes you need what you're going to spend that money on. So sometimes you just need the supplies or the equipment. And in-kind donations are a great way to do that. Many local stores and national retailers have procedures and applications in place that you can ask them for the equipment that you need. If you need a GPS unit, or you need flagging tape, or maybe you even need gas cards, and they will make a donation to your project or to your organization. There's also really specific product grants where it's just like filling out a regular grant application, but instead of asking for money, you're asking for specific scientific products. So Wildlife Acoustics has a product grant program where you can apply to receive things like bat detectors or bird song detectors. Celestron Optics right now is running a grant application where teachers who use citizen science in their classrooms can apply to receive binocular sets for their classrooms. So there are ways that you can get donations directly of the materials that you need. And there are times when you don't need to actually own or keep long-term the items that you're going to be using. And in that case, you might want to explore lending libraries. We do have a number of lending libraries in Wisconsin run by various organizations. And just like when you go to the public library to check out a book, you can go to a lending library to borrow a clipboard or a compass or a trail camera, a set of binoculars. There's a due date, you promise to give it back, and you use it for the amount of time that you need it for, and then return it so that other projects and other organizations in the state can use it as well. So let's move on to grants.
Sure. So we'll start. We have a few slides here on grants. Grants are technically funds dispersed typically to qualified exempt organizations. They're typically for a specific project and often require deliverables such as interim or final reports, measurable outcomes. Many are competitive, so you often have to apply, but they do typically have regular deadlines, annual deadlines, which allows you to plan ahead. Even if you're particularly ambitious, putting together a grants calendar can really help you plan ahead for the year and the funding that you need for your projects. As I mentioned, they typically require tax-exempt status, meaning your organization is a 501c3 nonprofit or a school or government agency or tribe. But if you're not a 501c3 organization, you can certainly consider working with existing nonprofit groups who may support your work by acting as a fiscal agent for the grant. Some of the grant programs that we offer at the Natural Resources Foundation, and again, you can learn more at wisconservation.org/grants. I included the three here that are most relevant to citizen science work in Wisconsin. The first is our Citizenbased Conservation Fund, which just closed. It's an annual grant program with applications due September 1st of each year, and that provides grants up to $1,000 to support really grassroots conservation and education projects. It's our broadest grant program that we offer, and really any projects that are related to conservation work in Wisconsin or connect people to conservation would be eligible. So that's a really great one for citizen science work. In the past, we funded citizen science equipment, citizen science trainings. Last year we funded firefly monitoring trainings. So that's a key one for citizen science work. Our second one I'm featuring is the Go Outside Fund, which is grants up to $500 for schools and partner organizations, and that must include a component of getting kids outside and hands-on with nature and learning experiences. So we have funded schools that have done citizen science work. I know there was a school in Brillion last year who received funding to get the students involved in stream monitoring work. So that's just a really great example of both participating in citizen science and getting the next generation outside. That program we offer on a quarterly basis. And then the final one is our Wisconsin Rare Plant Preservation Fund, which is a little bit more specific. That provides grants up to $1,000 for projects that protect Wisconsin's rare plants and lichens through monitoring, inventorying, and preservation. So we've supported the Wisconsin Rare Plant Monitoring Program in the past, and any rare plant monitoring or preservation work would be eligible for this program. That program is, applications are due February 1st of each year. So definitely check out our website for more information. If you have any questions specifically about these programs, feel free to shoot me an email or contact the Natural Resources Foundation.
Great. So there are a number of other sources of grants as well, of course, and we're not going to list all of them because that would take ages and ages, but here are a couple ideas that you can explore. You should look into community foundations. These are foundations that are going to be offering grants at a local level to the communities that they support. There's the Greater Milwaukee Community Foundation, the Madison Community Foundation, for example. Also, a number of corporations give out grants, and they tend to give out grants to communities where they're based. So if they have a headquarters or a regional office in your community, things like utilities, banks, or any other large corporation might have a grant-making option. The Wisconsin DNR surface water grants can be an option if you're doing citizen science work with aquatic invasive species, or AIS. There's also private foundations, especially family foundations, such as the James Dutton Foundation, which has funded citizen science work in Wisconsin in the past. For private foundations, they usually have a very specific type of project that they will fund, whether it's in a certain location or a certain topic, like maybe they're very interested in environmental education or they're very interested in protecting our waters. So you'll want to do a little bit of research to see what private foundations fit with your organization. The Wisconsin Society for Ornithology also offers some small grants for, of course, bird research. And then finally, a new one is the U.S. Forest Service SIT-SCI Fund. This is something that they just started last year, and it's an option for people whose projects take place either on Forest Service land or whose projects might be able to partner with the Forest Service.
Some of the ways that you can find out about grant opportunities that may fit with your project, the Environmental Education in Wisconsin website does a really great job of providing upcoming grant opportunities. Foundations in Wisconsin is a subscription-based service run through Marquette University, and that lists every single foundation in the state of Wisconsin, but that does require an annual fee. Foundation Center is similar on a nationwide scale, and then you might consider looking at, for example, UW-Madison or some other universities' grants library. You can go in person or check out their website for more information, but they can definitely be great resources for learning about specific funding opportunities in your geographic area or area of interest.
All right. So if you decide to apply for a grant, sometimes it can be a little overwhelming, or even if you've been writing grants and filling out grant applications, there might be questions that you have or tips that you might not be aware of. So Kate and I have put together some grant application tips that we want to share with you. These are ways to increase your chances of being funded. First one is, and this is I think the most imperative, you need to reach out and make contact with the grant manager or the grant contact person to share your idea, get feedback on your idea, and listen to their suggestions. They might tell you right away, oh, actually this does not fit with what we want to fund. You might want to consider switching it to, another option. You don't want to waste your time writing out an entire grant application if one phone call or one email will let you know that you're barking up the wrong tree. Make sure, too, that you meet all the requirements for the grant. Don't try to fit a square peg into a round hole. Now, some of this might be obvious. If it says they only fund work in Michigan and you're in Wisconsin, probably don't want to apply for that grant. But if it's a less clear issue, maybe they say they only fund water quality and you're doing work with dragonflies, you're not quite sure. In that situation, again, reach out to that grant contact and make sure. Don't just push through an entire application and hope for the best.
I would just add too, but don't write it off either. If you do think it might fit, consider calling or emailing that person, because sometimes even if it isn't the exact language, they might consider funding your project as well.
Absolutely. Reaching out is that key. Any questions that you have, you should reach out to that grant contact or the manager, whoever the contact person is, and ask the questions that you have. When you're actually writing your application, be as clear and concise as possible. Just because it says the maximum is 500 words for a specific area doesn't mean it has to be 500 words. A lot of these grant makers will be reading sometimes hundreds of applications coming through. So if yours can be very short, very precise, easy to read, that might make it stand out a little bit more. Similarly, use professional language in an active voice. Don't make it difficult for them to read and evaluate. Avoid jargon, acronyms, flowery language, anything that might sort of mask the point that you're trying to get across. Always make sure that you have your facts right, especially with citizen-based monitoring where you're talking about science, you're talking maybe about ecology, if you're talking about the importance of monitoring whether it's monarchs or water quality or moose. Don't have any factual errors when you're describing the importance of those organisms or ecosystems, because oftentimes the grant maker will know that, or they'll do a little bit of research. And if you don't know the facts about your ecosystem or your organism, they probably aren't going to fund you to do research into it. You should definitely tailor each application that you create. Every grant maker is going to ask different questions. They're going to be looking for different things. They're going to have different goals. So just like when you apply for a job and you're tailoring each resume that you create, tailor each application. Don't simply copy and paste from one to the next. And similarly, know your audience. Know what it is that they're looking for. If you know the skill set or the experience levels of the folks who are going to be reviewing or evaluating the grant applications, that can be very helpful, especially in determining how much technical information you need to put in. And whenever possible, try to strengthen your application by including and engaging partner organizations that can help to lend expertise that your group might not have. can strengthen your credibility. That's especially important if you're a small project that's just getting started and people haven't heard of you yet. And a partner organization can also bring in financial support.
All right, and we have some more tips on grant applications for you. One thing that funders often look for is the justification for funding. If the project will not move forward without their support, make sure you include that information in the proposal. Or if it will double the work that you're able to do, make sure you include that so they get a sense of, if they decide to contribute to your project, what it actually means. Also, typically don't request funding for expenses that have already been incurred. This depends on the grant application, but typically is not something that funders like to support because you've already incurred those expenses. Make sure your numbers add up. It's simple, but I review all of our grant applications that come into our NRF programs, and it's, there's always budget tables that don't add up, so it's a simple task or activity you can do at the end of your application just to make sure that your budget table is correct. Something I really like to see and typically do when I write proposals is to include stories of impact in photos. Sharing anecdotes or quotes and including photos can really provide that personal sense of what the project will accomplish and that impact. And that's something, again, it depends if you're applying for a federal grant. That's something they probably wouldn't as much appreciate seeing, but certainly with private foundations or corporations, they really love to see bringing it back home and what that project is really going to accomplish, whether that's highlighting some volunteers that are working on your project, highlighting some of the accomplishments. That's just a really nice piece to include. That being said, also make sure you include measurable outcomes. That's kind of a buzzword in the funding space, but it's something that many funders really often require or like to see. So that just means numbers, right? Metrics, number of volunteers engaged, number of people who benefited, number of children who are participating in the project, number of miles of streams monitored, that sort of thing. That's, again, something that's often baked into grant applications, but is really important to include. Again, just carefully fill out the entire grant. Don't skip sections unless they actually are optional and really don't apply to you. But just assume that the whole application does apply to you, and make sure that you answer the questions and fully read what each prompt is asking. And proofread your application. Oftentimes, sort of the quality of an application, right, isn't as important as what the actual impact will be, but it's still something that is considered often by review committees. If you have a sloppy proposal, they might not, if there's an equally credible proposal that they're looking at or comparing it to, they might not end up funding it if yours clearly you did not put time in and just simply proofread. So that's an important step and something you can easily do at the end. And another important piece is to find matching funds if you can. In-kind volunteer hours at the federal rate can really add up, and looking for other matching sources sometimes is a requirement for grant programs. I know it is for a handful of our own grant programs at the foundation, but even regardless, most funders these days really look to see that you're leveraging other resources available. All right, and so congratulations, you got the grant. We have some tips here on what you can do after you've received the funding to increase the chances of you being funded again and really just starting to build a relationship with that funder. Thank them. That's an obvious step. If your grant is being processed, no matter if it's with a nonprofit organization or school or government agency, you'll be required to send a tax-deductible receipt, but also send a personal thank you note or call. We often try to do kind of creative thank you notes with a picture, for example, of the place that a donor is funding, or just making it a personal touch. That goes a long way. Of course, provide any deliverables that you promised, including timely and complete interim and final reports, and any other deliverables that you promised or is required for the grant application. That's kind of a no-brainer, but if you don't submit a report and it says they won't consider funding you again if you don't submit the report, well, that's going to be the case. And even if they don't have that requirement, it's really just best practice and courteous to provide those reports.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just interject to add that if there's a reason why you cannot provide the deliverable, and that happens sometimes with citizen-based monitoring if there's a weather issue. Maybe you were going to do stream monitoring and it got flooded out and it wasn't safe for your volunteers to go out and do that monitoring. And so you weren't able to get as many data points as, in terms of that deliverable. Tell them that, explain that. Most grant agencies will understand that there are acts of nature or safety issues that come up. So there are times when you might have a very valid reason, but make sure you explain that fully.
Mm-hmm. Or if you need an extension, that's usually easily granted by the funder as well. Also, just building a personal relationship with that grant contact is so important. Sending them updates, informal updates, even if it's not the final report, just sending them photographs or, hey, this went really well, or, oh, shoot, this didn't go exactly as we planned. Keeping them in the loop can really go a long way as well. And it's good to know even you never know when other funding opportunities might come up, or they might be able to connect you to other organizations they're working with. It's just a really great resource, and funders really like being just knowing what the organizations that they support are up to. Just generally staying in communication with them about what's working or what's not. Photos, I love getting photos kind of throughout the year from different projects, or nuggets of information, quotes. They're just really great to have, to be able to, at our organization, we share that frequently on social media, for example, or our other communications. And then another thing that we like to do is invite the funders out in the field to see the work in action. That's something that's really fun, and I think a lot of funders like to do when they have the time, is to go out and see the project in action. So if that's an opportunity for you, definitely consider doing that.
Yeah, I will second that. For a lot of people, especially if they're working at a granting organization, they might be someone who doesn't get outside into the field very often. And so if you're able to invite them out to do your work, if you're going birding or you're doing lake quality monitoring, that can be something that they remember, the one day that year that they got out and were able to participate in something like that. So definitely worth asking them to come out and do some work with you. Now, what happens if you didn't get the grant? Now, hopefully you all will, but there are going to be cases where you don't. Granting organizations have limited funding. They cannot accept every single application. Well, that doesn't mean everything is over. There's still ways that you can go forward. The very first thing that you should do is politely ask for feedback from that grant manager, that program officer, the person that you were in contact with when you first decided to apply, and ask them why you didn't receive the funding. They might have some really good feedback for you. They might say, it just wasn't what our priority was this year, but next year we're looking to go more in that direction. Or they might say, if you had just a little bit more education or a little bit less focus on, terrestrial systems, because we're focused more on aquatic, something like that. Some decent feedback that you can actually take to use in your next round of applications. So you want to revise and try again. If you get any sort of feedback that suggests that you have a chance in the future with that granting agency, definitely try again. I used to be a grant writer in Minnesota, and I know it was rare for us to get a first-time grant. We would usually have to apply a couple years before we received the grant that we were going after. You also want to consider alternative sources of funding. So just like we mentioned at the beginning, grants are not the only option. Think about things like donations. Think about silent auctions. Think about if you want to do some of those more creative things like Amazon Smile or TerraCycle. Think of ways that don't depend on grants. And also consider leveraging your volunteers for more than just what they're doing right now. In many cases, our volunteers are focused on data collection, but you might have tasks that you were going to use funding for that your volunteers could help with. So you might have people who could do some data analysis or who can help with education and outreach by tabling at an event. You might have volunteers who just love to construct things like bat houses or kestrel boxes, and then you don't need to go out and buy those with grant funding. You can save a little bit of money in that way. So there are options for you to move forward. We certainly don't want you to think that if you didn't get the grant or you didn't receive the funding that you were after, that your project can't continue. That's certainly not the case. There's always other steps that you can do or other ways that you can get creative in order to fund your project. Now, if you have any questions, you can certainly reach out to me and Kate. Our website information is easy to find, and it was in the slides as well. So at any point, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have about funding options or tips or any of the information that we've presented here today.